Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thank you for joining today's course, the 1984 Attack on Sikhi, June, November, and the Aftermath. This course will run for 4 weeks, taking place every Saturday for the month of October. In today's class, we'll look in detail at what occurred in Amritsar in June of 1984. The first hour of this class will be led by our lecturer, Santbir Singh, after which we will have time for Q&A from the audience. So please, even as the conversation goes on in the middle of the session, you can continuously drop your questions into the chat box. And I'll send a reminder for that as well as the class goes on. Before I hand it over to Santbir Singh, I'll do a little introduction. Santbir Singh is a research associate with SikhRI. He's currently doing his PhD in sociology at York University. His graduate research focuses on Sikh activism and the inherent relationship between Sikhi and anarchism, explored through historical and contemporary study of Sikh governance models, especially the Sarbat Khalsa. I'll turn it over to you, Santbir.
Yeah, Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Wonderful having you all here. Really excited for these next 4 weeks. I'm looking forward to doing this deep dive into 1984. Earlier this year, we did a course looking at the background of 1984 from the 1930s to 1984. So we are not going to be focusing on the background in this course. We will be looking instead at what actually happened in 1984. I do want to give a little bit of a warning before we begin, especially these first 2 weeks when we are talking about June and November of 1984. There's a lot of difficult imagery. There's a lot of difficult content, a lot of really graphic imagery of people who have been killed, people who have been tortured, and so on. And so just as a warning to those of you who are attending that the content can be a little bit difficult and to take care of yourselves. In today's class, we're going to be looking at specifically June 1984, and we're going to be looking at what happened not only in Amritsar, but in Punjab in general. So to begin with, I wanted to take a few minutes to have a brief discussion about what do we call June 84 or 84 in general. There's been a lot of back and forth in the community discussion about what language to use when we're talking about 1984. I think it's been quite interesting over the last 10 to 20 years as young diasporic Sikhs have started to be more conscious of the language that they use when talking about 84 and have turned away from using Indian government terminology and are starting to use native terms instead. So the government term for what happened in June of 84 would be Operation Blue Star. That was the Army code name for what happened in June of 1984. I think that it's best practice, and of course this is an individual preference, to not use the government's terminology, but instead to use terminology that speaks to our experience as Sikhs, to something that resonates with us. Words that capture historical context and the Sikh context. Often it has become popular over the last few years to use the term Battle of Amritsar when talking about June 84. I think this is really a good step in the right direction. There are a few issues with the term Battle of Amritsar, though, that I just want to talk about very quickly. First of all, what happened in June of 84 did not just happen in Amritsar. It happened across Punjab. And so when we use the term Battle of Amritsar, we are sort of getting rid of the rest of the experience of Sikhs in Punjab who also underwent some difficult times in June of 84. The other issue with the term Battle of Amritsar is that it focuses on those who were fighting against the Indian government, the Indian army. And while we celebrate and eulogize those brave Sikhs that stood up for defending the sovereignty of the Harimandar Sahib complex, and we really celebrate them as shaheeds, as martyrs of the Sikh tradition, we also have to remember that there were thousands of non combatants who were also trapped in the complex and who were also killed in many other gurdwaras across Punjab. And so the term battle can sometimes erase the experience of those who were not fighters. When we use terms like genocide or nasl kushi in Punjabi, we sometimes then in turn erase the experience of those who fought and instead focus only on those who were quote unquote victims. I think that the best, and I wrote an article about this earlier this year, and feel free to read up on it. It's part of the reading package for today's class. I know that many of you registered late, and we will send out the reading package again at the end of the class today, so you can catch up during the week if you want to catch up on the readings. But I wrote an article called "No More Blue Stars." And it was an article about how what I believe the right thing to do is to turn to Sikh history and Sikh culture for the terminology to describe what happened in June and November of 1984. And the Sikh term that captures what happened in 84 is Kalukara. This is a native Sikh term that Sikhs created in the 1700s to describe two large-scale massacres and battles that happened in the 1740s and 1760s. And the word Kalukara encompasses the experience of not only those who fought, but also those who were non-combatants. I think, therefore, it captures the idea that we want to bring in of all of those who were affected by the events of June 84. It honors both the fighters and those who were not able to fight as well. It also ties the memory of 1984 to larger Panthic memory, to the experience of what Sikhs have been through in the past, thereby creating a through line, allowing Sikhs of the present to see the events that occurred in 84 and afterwards as a continuation of a long-standing trend of governments oppressing Sikhs, as well as a tradition of Sikhs being resilient and fighting back against government oppression. So with that, for this course, we will be using the term Kalukara, and that's what I will be using throughout these next 4 weeks. The term Kalukara, if you want to explore it more, feel free to read that article, No More Blue Stars. It's on the SikhRI homepage, and it will also be sent to you if you have not already received it as a reading package for today's class. The Tarmiyad Morcha started in August of 1982, and from August of 1982 to May of 1984, tensions increased rapidly in Punjab. Violence from the government against Sikhs also increased throughout that time period. By late May of 1984, it became clear that the government was going to do some sort of army action on the Harimandar Sahib complex. When it would occur, the nature of it, the scale of it was unknown by anybody, except for those who were planning the attack. Sikhs were in the dark as to when this attack might take place and how brutal and savage it might be. In the days leading up to the attack in late May and early June of 1984, Punjab was shut off from the outside world. There was a 24-hour curfew put into place. All telephone lines were cut. No foreigners were allowed entry, and all journalists were expelled from the state. Only a few managed to stay behind. There were no newspapers, as this quote says, no trains, no buses, not even a bullock cart could move. So that's sort of the state of Punjab in late May, early June of 1984. Punjab has been shut off from the rest of the world. Army units are being moved into Punjab, and army units that have Sikhs in them are being moved out of Punjab. So this is also happening in the lead up to the attack in June of 1984. Around the complex, border security forces and the Central Reserve Police have set up positions around the complex, such as this one in this image here. India has a whole host of different military and paramilitary organizations. The BSF and the SRPF are just two of them. They were the initial ones that set up the cordons around the complex. The army then came in and supplanted these other organizations in the days leading up to June 84. While it appeared that the attack and the logic for the attack occurring from the government's perspective was always that there were terrorists in the complex and the terrorists needed to be removed, that the law and order situation in Punjab was deteriorating, that anti national elements had taken over the complex, and that the government had no choice but to go in and do the attack. The actual truth, and we know this from General S.K. Sinha, the second highest general in the Indian Army pre 1984. General S.K. Sinha was actually in line to be the head, the chief of the army staff, the head general of the Indian Army. But when Indira Gandhi ordered the attack on the Harimandar Sahib complex, General S.K. Sinha refused, saying that it was not the right decision. And because of this, he was forcibly retired, and his promotion that he was supposed to be given was given to General Vedya instead, someone who had no problem with carrying out and planning the attack. As General S.K. Sinha says in this interview soon after June 84, and he has said this on many times, he passed away recently, but there are YouTube videos, interviews of him that are easily found if you search his name up. He stated that, in fact, Indira Gandhi had been planning the attack from the beginning of the Dharmiyad Morcha in August of 1982. This had been a long-term plan of Indira Gandhi's. The army had been rehearsing in the Doon Valley, where a complete replica of the Harimandar Sahib complex had been built. So the government and army had been planning the attack for over 2 years by the time the attack occurred in June of 84. The fact that the attack was planned out so long before it actually occurred demonstrates that all of the logic that the government uses to justify the attack was in fact false. I'm not going to go into too many of the details of what happened in the Dharmiyad Morcha, the backroom machinations and negotiations and selling out that occurred from Akali Dal leadership, because we talked about that already in the earlier course earlier this year, the betrayals and broken promises course. But what I wanted to focus on right now is this idea that this attack was not something was that occurred because there was no other option. And this attack definitely did not occur because Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale was inside the complex. Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale had been arrested before 1984 in 1982. Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale could have been targeted in a sniper shot easily many times before June 84. If the logic of the attack was that they needed to remove Jarnail Singh from the complex. He could have easily have been removed from the complex many times over. The attack on the complex was something much greater than just taking out Sant Jarnail Singh. It was to be a blow against the Sikh people. It something to teach us a lesson so that we wouldn't ever raise our heads and fight for justice, fight for democracy, fight for our rights and the rights of others again in India. The full justification and logic of the government's attack is explored in another article that I wrote earlier this year called The Attack on Political Sikhi, which has also been sent to you. And for those of you who registered late, we will send it to you after the class is over. It can also be found on the SikhRI webpage. So in that article, I point out that this attack was part of a long-standing pattern that had been set into place from before partition in 47, where the Indian government, the Indian elite, had made promises to Sikhs that their rights would be protected, and time again, those rights were instead trampled on, and promises were broken again and again. To understand Indira Gandhi's anger, especially at Sikhs in June of 1984, it's important to understand the history of Indira Gandhi, the emergency that occurred in 1975 to 1977, the political logic that Indira Gandhi was operating under, the reason why she wanted to demonize a minority population in the country in order to shore up support so that she wouldn't lose an election again. So all of that is discussed in the reading. We don't have the time, unfortunately, to go into the details of that. But what is important to keep in mind is that the attack was not about removing quote unquote terrorists from the complex. It was about teaching the Sikh Qawm, the Sikh Panth, the Khalsa Panth a lesson. It was to ensure that we would not stand up again, that we would remain silent, that we would remain passive, and that we would not cause problems for the Indian government in the future. As it became clear that the government would attack, the Sikhs inside of the complex started to make preparations for battle. These preparations for battle were led by the man on the left of the screen, General Shabeg Singh. General Shabeg Singh was a master of guerrilla warfare. He was an Indian Army general who had trained the Bangladeshi freedom fighters in the Bangladeshi War for Independence from Pakistan in 1971. He had trained the Bangladeshi fighters in how to engage in guerrilla warfare against the Pakistan army. The Indian government supported the Bangladeshis in their fight for independence in order to destabilize Pakistan. General Shabeg Singh was really an incredible figure. He had joined Sant Jarnail Singh in the Tanmiyad Morcha in 1983. He had been purposely pushed out of the army and disrespected by the army, even though he had sacrificed his whole life to the cause of the Indian army and had given up so much to serve the Indian army. Disillusioned, disappointed, he turned to the Khalsa Panth and came to Sant Jarnail Singh and offered his services. Sant Jarnail Singh recognized the genius that General Shabeg Singh had and quickly got him started on ensuring that the complex could be defended from an oncoming attack. We will not get into too much right now about the logic of whether the Harimandar Sahib complex should be defended, whether there should be weapons in the complex, whether Sikhs had a right to defend the complex from outsiders. We'll talk about that if we have time, either at the end of today's talk or next week. But what I wanted to cover very quickly is this idea in Sikh tradition that the sovereignty of our spaces must be maintained regardless. That the brick and marble and gold can be replaced on the buildings, but the principles behind them cannot be replaced. And the principles of the sovereignty, the freedom, the independence of the Sikh Qawm, of the Khalsa Panth, is something that must be maintained. Those who defended the complex in June of 1984 were following in the footsteps of giants, of figures like Baba Deep Singh and Baba Gurbakh Singh, of people who had in the past sacrificed everything to free the Harimandar Sahib complex from foreign government control. So what happened in June of 84 in defending the complex, in creating military positions in the complex, of creating defensive positions in the complex, this was all in keeping with Sikh tradition and Sikh history. These preparations for battle really started to ramp up in the days leading up to the June attack. It was clear to everyone by May of 1984 that the attack would be occurring soon. There were not many defenders inside the complex. The main defenders inside the complex were composed of three groups: the members, students of the Damdami Taksal, which was led by Sant Jarnail Singh Khalsa; members of the All India Sikh Students Federation, which was led by Bhai Amrik Singh; and a small group of Babbar Khalsa Sikhs led by Jathedar Sukhdev Singh Babbar. These were the main groups that were defending the complex in the days coming up to the attack. All of these groups were working to try to ensure that the sovereignty of the complex could be maintained. The Taksal and the Federation were working together as one unit. The Babbar Khalsa were operating separately as their own force. These less than 250 members of Sikhs who defended the complex, and their names can be found in this book, and we will release a bibliography for those of you who want to learn more about June 84. This book was put out by Dal Khalsa, and in this book, Dal Khalsa lists the names of everyone who was martyred, along with a photo of theirs, who died defending the complex in June of 84. There were not many who were there to defend the complex, and those who were there did not have access to the most sophisticated weaponry available. In fact, most of the Sikhs who defended the complex in June of 1984 had access only to World War II era guns. So that the firepower between the Sikhs defending the complex and the Indian army that was about to attack the complex was really severe. The Indian army at the time was the world's third largest army in the world, and spent a huge amount of money on their military budget. It was really truly a battle like what occurred at Chamkaur Sahib with Guru Gobind Singh Ji and the Vade Sahibzade, where a small, tiny force with few weapons had to defend a position against a much larger and more militarily sophisticated army. It's truly one of the most unfair or unbalanced battles in human history. While no one knew when the attack would occur, most people did not assume that it would occur in the first week of June. And the reason for this was because Guru Arjan Sahib Ji's Shahidi Purb, the anniversary of the date that Guru Arjan, the fifth Guru of the Sikhs, was martyred, was June 3rd of 1984. It fell on June 3rd that year. And Guru Arjan Sahib Ji is, of course, the Guru who built the Harimandar Sahib inside of the Sarovar that was built by his father, Guru Ramdas Sahib Ji. And so any Gurpurb associated with Guru Ramdas, Guru Arjan, or Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji is very much celebrated in big numbers, celebrated by a lot of people in Amritsar, and are some of the most important days of the year in Amritsar. And Guru Arjan Sahib Ji Shahidi is one of these very important days in the Sikh calendar in Amritsar. And so there would be thousands upon thousands of Sikhs visiting from local villages around Punjab, especially around the Amritsar area, who had a tradition of coming to the complex whenever there was a major Gurpurb or festival like Diwali or Vaisakhi. And so most people assumed that why would the government attack when there was thousands of non-combatants gathered in the complex? Of course, we would know that that is when the government purposely chose to attack. Now we will go through day by day what occurred from June 1st to June 10th. These 10 days mark the beginning, and June 10th is when the last fighters who were defending the complex were finally killed. So let's go through day by day and see what occurred in June of 1984. On June 1st, the army started to fire onto the complex. The Harimandar Sahib building itself had 34 bullet shots in it on June 1st of 1984. 6 were killed all over the complex, including a mother with a baby who was walking on the Parkarma. A position of 6 who were armed and ready for battle at Baba Atal Gurdwara, which is on the edge of the complex and the tallest building in Amritsar, were also attacked by the army. That position was being held by the Babbar Khalsa. And so the first martyr of June 1984 was a Babbar Khalsa Sikh Singh named by Menga Singh Babbar, who was killed on June 1st of 1984. The government attacked on June of 84, and we believe that they attacked in order to test the defenses of the complex. Sant Jarnail Singh had told those under his command not to fire back until the army actually entered the complex. The reason for this was that they had very limited ammunition, and they needed to preserve the ammunition for the actual battle. And so they could not fire back until they had the enemy in their sights. And so the army shot into the complex without really any response from the Sikhs inside the complex in June of 1984. June 2nd of 1984 was a very quiet day in the complex. There was no more shooting from outside, and there had never been any shooting from the inside up to that point. General K.S. Brar, who was the lead general of the attack, he was the one on the ground who was leading the battle, leading the Indian army. This is a quote of his: "We cannot allow a few scoundrels to hold the government of India at ransom. We shall see to it that they are on their knees in just 2 hours." So Brar and the other generals who were in charge of the battle believed that they would make easy work of the Sikhs inside the complex, and they would be able to take over the entire complex within a matter of hours. They did not anticipate how strong the Sikh response would be to the battle, and how bravely and courageously the Sikhs would fight back against the Indian Army soldiers. June 2nd is when Bhai Manga Singh's Babbar's funeral took place as well inside the complex. And this is the Shahidi Swarup, or the dead body of Bhai Manga Singh Babbar. Indira Gandhi released a statement on June 2nd. She said, "I appeal, don't shed blood, shed hatred." She made the statement as she was planning as her army was planning to enter the complex and attack it, just to show the hypocrisy of her words. Now, because there was no firing on June 2nd, many Sikhs assumed that what had occurred on June 1st was an anomaly. This is also before the age of social media. And many Sikhs in the villages surrounding Harimandar Sahib were not even aware that the shootings had occurred. And so thousands of Sikhs arrived on June 3rd to the complex. No one can make sense of the government's actions on June 3rd. It seems quite purposeful that the government, what they did was they opened the curfew, allowed thousands of Sikhs into the complex, and then reinstated the curfew, thus trapping thousands of Sikhs inside the complex. If they wanted to avoid civilian casualties, if they wanted to avoid non-combatants being killed in the army operation, they would not have allowed thousands of Sikhs into the complex, or once they had allowed them into the complex, they would have allowed them to go free before the attack began on June 4th. Instead, they did something very different. They imposed a curfew, thus trapping thousands inside the complex. So there are about 250 fighters inside the complex. There are at least 10,000 non-combatants who have come to the complex to pay respects to Guru Arjan Sahib Ji on his Shahidi Parb. And there are hundreds of Dharmiyad Morcha activists who have come to the complex on a regular schedule in order to give themselves up for arrest in the ongoing Dharmiyad Morcha. Those are the numbers of the people inside the complex on June 3rd, 1984. Why did the government allow all those people into the complex, and why then did they trap them and not let them leave the complex? Why did they shut train service to Amritsar and not allow people who had come from outside Amritsar to leave Amritsar, thus trapping them in Amritsar? The only thing that makes sense is that the government wanted to inflict maximum casualties on the Sikh Panth, that they wanted to ensure that there were as many innocent Sikhs killed as possible in the attack in June of 1984, in order to, quote-unquote, teach Sikhs a lesson. This is from a really important book written by a group of Indian human rights activists, all of them non-Sikhs, called the Citizens for Democracy. And this book contains a detailed day-by-day account from eyewitnesses, from people who were inside the complex, of what occurred in the first week of June 1984. No one inside the Golden Temple had yet realized the sinister plan of the authorities. Punjab had been sealed. Amritsar had been sealed. The Golden Temple had been sealed. Thousands of pilgrims and hundreds of Akali workers had been allowed to collect inside the temple complex. They had been given no inkling or warning either of the sudden curfew or of the imminent army attack. It was a black hole type of tragedy, not out of forgetfulness, but out of deliberate planning and design. That's very important to keep in mind. That the attack that occurred and the civilian casualties that occurred was not some sort of oversight by the government and army, but in fact was the entire point of the government and army's attack. It was to ensure that there were the maximum number of Sikhs killed in the attack. At Amritsar, around 3 to 4 o'clock in the morning on June 4th, shelling began inside the complex. Large shells, 80 millimeter shells and larger, were fired into the complex. Those who were inside the complex talk about when the first shells hit and how it felt how the whole complex had collapsed because of the force of the blast of these large munitions. There was no warning given. There were thousands of people sleeping on the prakarma and in the rooms around the prakarma because they had nowhere else to stay. They had been trapped inside the complex. And then the army started to shell the complex while all of these non-combatants were trapped there. The shelling continued until the night of June 6th without stop. So over 2 days of constant shelling occurred between June 4th and June 6th. This is a quote from Sant Jarnail Singh. This quote is from May of 1984. And he says, "Don't be the first to attack, but don't let any attack go unanswered. We shall take care of thousands of them at the first assault." So Sant Jarnail Singh knew that the complex would be invaded, and he promised that the Sikhs would boldly defend the complex to the last man and woman. They ensured that they did not fight back until they had the army in their sights. Specially trained commandos from the 1st Battalion, the Parachute Regiment, dressed in black denims, wearing bulletproof vests, were directed to force their entry from the main entrance of the complex. This is from the Kentakar side, the main entrance that is still being used today. But as soon as they stepped in, the Sikh defenders positioned on either side of the entrance gunned them down. The few who managed to flee towards the prakarma were taking care of other defenders entrenched around the Akal Takat. So General Shabig Singh had set up positions around the entrances to the complex, ensuring that any army soldiers that tried to enter the complex would be quickly gunned down by the defenders. Many of those who were shot initially by the government commandos were shot below the knee, as the defenders were hiding in the sides of the stairs of the entrance to the complex. For those of you who have been to Harimandar Sahib, the Harimandar Sahib complex is lower than the rest of the city. And so one has to walk down steps to get to the prakarma, or the walkway around the Harimandar Sahib, around the Golden Temple. And so when one walks down, on the sides of those steps, the positions had been set up by General Shabig Singh to target the army soldiers that were entering the complex. The army was completely unprepared for the level of defense that the Sikhs were putting up. Desperate to try to ensure that the attack was successful, the army brought in armored personnel carriers, or APCs, and tanks into the complex on the 5th of June. Large battles took place at both the Kentakar side and the Atta Mandi side of the complex. And I'll show a map of the complex in just a minute so you can get a sense of where the battles took place. The three generals, Sundarji, Dayalji, and Bararji, who had boasted before Indira Gandhi that they would capture Sant Bhindranwale dead or alive within 2 hours, had to cut a sorry figure. They had taken 3 days, i.e. 72 hours, but they were nowhere near their objective. They became frustrated and desperate. This is an armored personnel carrier that was attacked by Sikhs and stopped on the prakarma of Harimandar Sahib. It's in the corner where water is served to this day when you go to the Harimandar Sahib complex. That's where this armored personnel carrier is located. So in this image where it says main north entrance on the bottom side of the image, or the Central Sikh Museum, that's one entrance. And across from it, where the Sikh Reference Library is, the Sikh Reference Library is behind that entrance, and that is the other main entrance. And so as the army tried to enter from those two entrances, they were attacked by the Sikhs that were positioned there. Sikhs were also positioned around the other entrances, with Sant Jarnail Singh, General Shabeg Singh, and Bhai Amrik Singh positioned at Akal Takht Sahib. They brought the tanks and armored personnel carriers through the main entrance, down the stairs there, and also from the Langar Hall side once they were able to kill all of the defenders in that area. The Langar Hall side being the Dukbanjani Bear side, towards the left of the image. The army and police have also taken over 38 temples and other Sikh religious buildings throughout Punjab. This is from the Guardian newspaper from June 7th of 1984. According to reports from Patiala Hospital, over 50 people were killed at Gurdwara Dukhnavadan in Patiala. According to research done by Sikh scholars and human rights workers in Punjab over the last 40 years, the actual number of Gurdwaras that were attacked, and this book documents them, Gurdwariyan de Hoy Fauji Hamliyan di Vitya, as well as this book, Sikh Nasl Kushi 1984. These books document that, according to the latest data that we have, over 108 other Gurdwaras were attacked in June of 1984. If the logic of the attack was that they needed to capture Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale and pacify him, then why were Gurdwaras attacked all around Punjab? Why were Sikhs targeted in historical Gurdwaras all around the state? Why were Sikhs, why did the army come and capture Gurdwaras all around Punjab in June of 1984? The only logic for this is that the government wanted to ensure that a mass uprising did not occur. Once people heard about the attack on Harimandar Sahib complex, it would be natural that they would gather at their local Gurdwara to plan and organize what to do, and then to march towards Amritsar to try to free Amritsar from the Indian government control. To ensure that Sikhs were not able to organize or march towards Harimandar Sahib, they attacked Gurdwaras all over the state. Just in Patiala, not a city known for its political radicalism or advocacy, 56 were killed inside of the historic Gurdwara of Guru Tegh Bahadur Sahib Ji's Dukhnavadan Gurdwara Sahib. That's just in one city in one Gurdwara. We don't know how many Sikhs were killed across Punjab in these 108 other Gurdwaras. June 6, the army, the tanks, and armored personnel carriers have been brought in. The tanks are firing directly onto Akal Takht Sahib. The armored personnel carriers are firing, and the shells are still being lobbed into the complex. Lieutenant General Jagjit Singh Arora, a retired Indian Army general, who studied images of the front of the Akal Takht before it was repaired, reckoned that as many as 80 high explosive shells were fired into the Akal Takht. It was on June 6 that Sant Jarnail Singh, General Shabeg Singh, Bhai Amrik Singh, Baba Tara Singh, Bibi Upkar Kaur, and others of the top leadership of the Tarmiyat Morcha were killed. Sant Jarnail Singh, it is said, was killed just outside of the two Nishan Sahibs, to the right, if one is looking at Akal Takht, to the right of Akal Takht Sahib. This is his body in the complex. Photos being taken of his body by the army to send to Indira Gandhi. He fought to the last breath and joined the legendary Sikhs of history as one of those great Sikhs who defended the complex, defended the Harimandar Sahib, and paid the ultimate price to ensure the sovereignty of central Sikh institutions remained. And he kept his promise that he had made to the Sangat in the months and years leading up to the attack, where he said that he would only leave the complex if either the Anandpur Sahib resolution was implemented and the Dharmyud Morcha was successful, or on the back of a truck as a dead body because the government had come and attacked and killed him. Remember, though, that there are still thousands of people trapped around the Prakarma, in the rooms around the Prakarma. Here's a quote from Harminder Kaur, a journalist who wrote a book called Blue Star over Amritsar. Harminder Kaur is not a pro-Sikh writer. She's very critical of Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale, but I thought it would be appropriate to bring in sources that were not pro-Panthic as well. This is her book here. Grenades and poisonous gas shells were thrown at men, women, and children who had locked themselves in the rooms, bathrooms, and toilets of Guru Nanak Nivas, Guru Ramdas Sarai, and Teja Singh Samundri Hall. Those who tried to come out were pierced with bayonets and shot dead. Some soldiers caught hold of small babies and children by their feet, lifting them up in the air, and then smashed them against the walls, thus breaking their skulls. On the evening of June 7th, the army came by and, using a loudspeaker, said, "Exit, and we will take you into custody. You will not be harmed." However, those who believed them and left the rooms were immediately shot down by the army. It was the worst type of treachery. Those who were not killed were arrested. The army took off their turbans, which they tied their hands behind their backs. Then the army beat these Sikh boys with the butts of their rifles until they fell on the ground and then were shot dead in front of me. This is from an eyewitness account. In the 1700s, when Sikhs would hear about an attack on the Harimandar Sahib complex, they would march and gallop towards Amritsar at full speed to try to defend the complex and get to it as soon as possible. A similar thing happened in June of 1984. Sikh army regiments, which had been positioned far from Punjab, over 5,000 Sikhs, and we don't know the exact numbers, it could be more, rebelled against their units in a desperate attempt to get to Amritsar. This occurred in Assam, Uttar Pradesh, Maharashtra, Gujarat, and Jammu and Kashmir. They fought battles against their fellow army soldiers in order to try to get to Amritsar and Harimandar Sahib to defend the complex. We call these soldiers Tarmfojis. They are Sikhs who were Indian Army soldiers who refused to follow the Indian Army once they found out that the attack on Harimandar Sahib was taking place, and were killed by their own fellow soldiers. On Saturday, medical workers in Amritsar said soldiers had threatened to shoot them if they gave food or water to the Sikh pilgrims wounded in attack and lying in the hospital. So even those who had been taken to the hospital, who had managed to be taken to the hospital, were in fact not being given care. The Red Cross was banned from entering the complex, which goes against the Geneva Conventions. Innocent Sikhs were being summarily executed and rounded up and killed or sent to jail. We don't know how many Sikhs were killed in the attack, how many were executed once the army had taken over the complex. A team of doctors examined 400 corpses, including 100 women and 15 to 20 children, all under 5, including a 2-month-old baby. Associated Press, 13th June 1984. On the 9th of June in 1984, Sikhs across India protested upon hearing about the attack occurring. The police fired at these unarmed Sikh protesters and killed dozens of them. We don't know how many, unfortunately, mainly in Delhi and in Srinagar in Kashmir. On the 10th of June, the last few defenders who were holed up in the complex in different rooms around the complex were killed. All around Punjab, thousands of Sikhs were arrested, up to 18,000 according to the estimates. Once the army had taken over the complex, and this is a quote from the famous scholar Joyce Pettigrew, the army, which had suffered a heavy toll in their three-day battle, went berserk and killed every Sikh man, woman, and child who could be found inside the temple complex. They were hauled out of the rooms, brought to the corridors on the circumference of the temple, and with their hands tied behind their backs were shot in cold blood. This is an image from after June 11th. So after the army had taken over the entire complex, after they had killed all the last defenders, they went into the Sikh reference library and looted it. We have eyewitness accounts that they carried away sacks full of manuscripts, Guru Granth Sahib Sarups, Gurkhas, and they burned the rest. We don't know how many were taken away and how many were destroyed. They have never been returned by the Indian government. We do not know if the Indian Army still has control over them, whether they destroyed them after the fact, or whether they are sitting somewhere in a warehouse somewhere. The Sikh Reference Library was a precious, really irreplaceable collection of historic Sikh documents, including Guru Granth Sahib Sarups that were written in the Guru's time, Hukamnamas written by the Gurus, Pothis written by the Gurus, treaties from the independent Sikh kingdom of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, historical Sikh texts, just dozens, hundreds of documents. As Joyce Pettigrew continues in her book, the army went into Darbar Sahib not to eliminate a political figure or a political movement, but to suppress the culture of a people, to attack their heart, to strike a blow at their spirit and self-confidence. I wanted to take a minute to talk about the women who were a part of the defenders of the complex. We don't have time to go into the names of many of the defenders who took part of the complex. I would recommend that you read this book by Dal Khalsa if you're interested in the names of all of the defenders, this book that I showed earlier. But I thought it was appropriate because really their names should be remembered, these brave Sikh women who died defending the complex in June of 1984. On the left is Bibi Upkar Kaur. She is the president of the women's wing of the All India Sikh Students Federation, one of the main leaders of the Dharma Yudh Morcha, and she was killed on June 6 along with Sant Jarnail Singh Khalsa. In the middle is Bibi Parmjit Kaur. This is a picture from her wedding, which took place just months before the attack inside the Harimandar Sahib complex. She was the wife of Shaheed Bhai Harminder Singh Sandhu, and she was also killed during the attack. On the right, you have the children of Bhai Mohar Singh and Bibi Pritam Kaur. Their names are Vaiguru Kaur and Satnam Kaur. They are children who were only 5 and 3 years old. The entire family sacrificed themselves to stop the armored personnel carriers from coming into the complex, and they died. Those children died defending the complex. Other women were also injured in the attack, like another Bibi Pritam Kaur, who was the wife of Bhai Rashpal Singh, the personal assistant of Sant Jarnail Singh Khalsa. She was holding her baby, who was 2 weeks old, by Manpreet Singh, and a bullet entered her husband's head, went through his head, into her baby's head, and then into her chest. Killed her husband, killed her baby, and injured her. She, along with hundreds of other survivors of the attack, were then taken to Jodhpur jail, where they were kept under arrest for up to 4 years without charges. Imagine surviving this horrific assault. Imagine making it out alive and then being put in jail in horrific conditions for 4 years without any recourse. That's what happened to the survivors of June 84. This is from the famous human rights worker Ram Narayan Kumar. The Operation Blue Star was not only envisioned and rehearsed in advance meticulously and in total secrecy, it also aimed at obtaining maximum number of Sikh victims, largely devout pilgrims unconnected with the political agitation. The facts should speak for themselves. You can see the image of the two soldiers smiling in front of the destroyed Akal Takht. They are happy that they are victorious and they have defeated an enemy. Operation Blue Star will go down in history as one of the biggest massacres of unarmed civilians by the organized military force of a nation. The word unarmed is used deliberately as the disparity in arms on the two sides was so great that those resisting army invasion of the temple could hardly be termed armed. This is an image of General Shabeg Singh. A metal rod has been inserted into his chest, and he was then dragged around the complex and beaten by soldiers who were especially disgusted by him because he had been a former Indian Army officer. This is a copy of a Guru Granth Sahib Sarup, which was shot during 1984. 6 were shot at point-blank range, their hands tied behind their backs with their turbans. It was a virtual massacre. A large number of women, children, and pilgrims were gunned down. 13th June from The Guardian. 70,000 troops, in conjunction with the use of tanks and chemical gas, killed hundreds, possibly thousands of innocent pilgrims, the day of the attack being a Sikh holy day. The Akal Takht was reduced to rubble, and the Sikh Reference Library, an irreplaceable collection of books, manuscripts, and artifacts, burned to the ground. 37 other shrines were attacked across Punjab on the same day. Again, we now know that the number is over 108. This is a picture of the Sikh Reference Library after it was gutted and burned. No effort was made to identify the dead or inform their relatives. Bodies were cremated immediately. No count was kept. No autopsies were performed. No medical aid, water, or food provision for the victims. The Indian Army released a white paper after the attack, and the white paper is full of lies that are easily disprovable. One of the 3 generals in charge of the attack, General K. Sundarji, says, "We went inside with humility in our hearts and prayers on our lips." The reality is, as Mark Tully, the BBC journalist, writes in his book, Mrs. Gandhi's Last Battle, Garnail Kaur, a young mother of 3 children, recalls when people begged for water, some Javans told them to drink the mixture of blood and urine on the ground. The army states that only 493 terrorists and others, quote, were killed. Citizens for Democracy and Independent Indian Human Rights Group estimated 8,000 dead. 10,000 pairs of shoes were found outside the complex after the attack. We don't know how many actually died in the attack, but conservative Bantak estimates are at least 10,000. We don't know how many were killed around Punjab. We don't know how many died inside Amritsar when water was shut off in the hottest days of the year and electricity was shut off. How many died in their homes? We don't know how many were died when their homes were demolished to make room for the tanks, because at that time, Harimandar Sahib was surrounded by small streets that were very hard for the tanks to enter into the complex. So we don't know how many Sikhs were actually killed altogether in June of 1984. The number could be much higher. There's no way to know, but conservative estimates are 8,000 to 10,000 Sikhs were killed in those few days. Before the attack, the Indian Army was very clear when Indira Gandhi told them that they needed to attack the complex and come up with a plan. The army stated, and this is according to internal government records, that the army should not be involved. And the Prime Minister's office response was, "You have told me," meaning, "You've told me and we don't care." This is from General V.K. Nair. The manner in which the situation was being handled would only make it worse and may result in it being dumped on the army. The army's involvement would have its ramifications within the army and thereby the need to warn and prevent it. So even the army did not want to have this attack take place. Generals with moral integrity, like General S.K. Sinha, refused to carry out the attack. Those who did not have moral authority, like General Vedya, agreed so that they could be promoted. And those who had any foresight knew that this was not a solution to the problem, and that this would only cause more problems and would result in the loss of innocent lives. Sundarji, this is a picture of him. He is one of the generals who led the attack. This is a quote from his wife. After Operation Blue Star, he was a changed man, somber, his laughter all but gone. He shrugged away my concern, assuring me I will get over it, but he never did. I have been trained to fight an enemy, not to tackle our own kind, he said. So there was a psychological impact even on the perpetrators of the violence. This is former Army Chief of Staff after 1984, General Shankar Chaudhary. When asked if the right steps had been taken in Punjab, no, certainly not. I don't think that the right steps were taken. Operation Blue Star was totally unwarranted and a mistaken step. The party in power at Delhi at the time had taken the step more on political consideration. So we will end there for today and go to questions now.
There are a couple questions in the Q&A, and some people have messaged me questions as well. But yes, some people saying if you want to see what the question, sometimes it's helpful to read them. If you go to the Q&A part of the chat, they'll pop up there. But I'll read the first question, which is there any record of the Akali Dal responses to the army actions, cutting off of Punjab from media, telecommunications, or curfews? Who were they appealing to? How did these responses address what was happening? And this person also shares that they're reflecting that we expect immediate responses, maybe instantaneous. I guess because we're situated in the year 2024, but if we're thinking about the 80s, that might have looked different. Just a response to that.
So it appears that the Akali Dal leadership knew that some type of attack was going to take place. They were hidden in a room that was not attacked during the army action. And they were then personally escorted out of the complex over literally the dead bodies of innocent pilgrims who were there, of the Sangat that was there. So people like Tora and Longoval, Badal was not there at the time, but Tora and Longoval were. Ramuvalia, Barnala, they literally walked over dead and dying women and children and were taken to safety by the army. What appears to have happened was that Indira Gandhi made a deal with the Akali leadership that she would get rid of Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale and then negotiate with them directly. that she would save them in the attack so that they could be the only viable voice left for the community after the attack. That is one theory. Right up to the days before the attack, Indira Gandhi was still stringing along the Akali leadership and telling them that negotiations were still going well. So maybe they didn't know about the attack, but she was definitely stringing them along and making it look like she was actually willing to do negotiations on the Anandpur Sahib resolution when actually this was a ploy and she was secretly planning the attack instead. There were no real statements by the Akali Dal during the attack because Amritsar, Harimandar Sahib was cut off from the rest of the world. Afterwards, there was condemnation of what the government had done by the leadership of the Harimandar Sahib complex itself, the Singh Sahibs. So like the Jathedar of Akal Takht, the head grantee of Harimandar Sahib, and so on. They, in August of 1984, issued a Futan Kaz, where they kicked out people who collaborated with the government, such as Baba Santa Singh, the head of the Nihangs, who had taken over the complex and was repairing the Akal Takht, or was pretending to repair the Akal Takht when it was actually being repaired by the Punjab government to try to cover up what had happened in the attack. So he was kicked out of the Banth in August of 1984. Throughout the summer of 1984, the certain Akali leaders and members of the leadership of the complex kept demanding that the complex be handed back over to the Sangat because the Sangat was barred from the complex with the exception of the Nihangs. In September of 1984, they held a Sarbat Khalsa of sorts at Baba Deep Singh Gurdwara in Amritsar, Baba Shahida Gurdwara is called. And at that Sarbat Khalsa, they kicked out Gyani Zail Singh, the president of India, and a minister with the Punjab government who was also a Sikh from the Banth. I can't remember his name now. And they declared that the government had to return the complex over back to Sikhs as soon as possible. The complex was returned to the Banth in October of 1984. Yeah. Let's go on to the next question, I guess. Or, sorry, you go ahead, Maninder. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Either way is fine. The next question is, were there foreigners inside? Was there response from foreign governments to this attack? If there were citizens from other countries? I guess thinking more about this, I'm thinking about that white paper response quote that you added, like the terrorists and others. Yeah, I'm really interested in that terrorist and other like framing as well.
Yeah. That's a really great question. Nowadays, we would be shocked if there weren't dozens, if not hundreds, of foreigners inside of Harimandar Sahib at all times, as Sanghat from all over the world is constantly visiting. This was less common but earlier. Not only was it less common, but remember that tensions were quite high at that time as well. To the best of my knowledge, I've never heard of any Sikh Sanghat from outside of Punjab who was killed during the attack. It might entirely be possible that there were Sikhs from Canada or the UK that were there, but I've never heard of that. That's a great question. In terms of foreign government's response, the foreign government's response was really disheartening. Some governments like Israel and the UK were openly supportive of Indira Gandhi and congratulated her on dealing with terrorists. Other governments like Canada's were silent, even though they had a large sizable population of Sikhs in the country, and did not condemn what the Indian government did. So no Western governments condemned what the Indian government did, and nobody stated that it was wrong on the world stage. Quite the opposite. She was celebrated. There's also been a lot of historical revisionism over time. So, for example, the right-wing Hindu parties, which at that time was called Jan Sangh, now claims to be really anti what happened in 84. When this actually happened in 84, they celebrated Indira Gandhi. They gave her a standing ovation in Parliament right after Operation Blue Star. Hindus in Punjab and Amritsar included, and in parts of, and when I mean Hindus, I mean right-wing nationalist Hindus, I apologize, and in Delhi celebrated the attack on Harimandar Sahib complex and gave out sweets, mithai, to celebrate the attack. Vajpayee, the former Prime Minister of India, later who became the BJP Prime Minister of India, made a statement congratulating Indira Gandhi on the attack. So both domestically and internationally, Indira Gandhi was seen as in the right. Sikhs were seen as in the wrong. And this was because the groundwork had been really well laid by the Indian government with months and months of propaganda demonizing Sikhs. I mean, most people would be shocked to find out that there was not even an arrest warrant issued for Sant Jarnail Singh in June of 1984. That according to the laws of the Indian government at the time in June 1984, he was a free man who had no arrest warrants, no charges against him, because he had not done anything illegal. So he was being demonized as this major terrorist, but in actuality, there was no cases against him. Similarly, Sikhs had been demonized, from the late 70s onwards across India. And a lot of people across the country were really happy about the attack when it happened. Yes. Next question.
Yeah, so I was sent one via chat, so I'll just throw that in the Q&A. Are the names / stories of individual Dharm Faujis, Sikhs who were in the military who went against the military, known? Is there a place to learn more about these individual stories?
There's been some work that's been done on that. The best book on June and November 84, the most recent, is this book right here, Sikh Nasl Kushi 1984, put out by Parmjit Singh Ghazi and Ranjit Singh from Sikh Siyasat organization. They have some work in here talking about the Dharm Faujis, but we do not have proper records of which soldiers and how many soldiers actually turned on other soldiers in the Indian Army and tried to march towards Amritsar to free Harimandar Sahib. I have met some Dharm Faujis in my life who were arrested and spent time in jail and then came to Canada as refugees. I remember meeting one in Montreal years ago. So not all of them were killed. Some of them were captured and arrested. But their individual stories, I don't know of any book that's documented that issue itself. That would be a good idea to research that. That's a good idea for someone to take that project on.
We have another question that was sent to me. Could you please elaborate more on the Dharm Yudh Morcha? I know we chatted about this, or you talked about this in the previous course, but yeah, if there's anything kind of brief that you wanted to share.
Yeah, so we don't really have a lot of time to get into it. If you're interested, the last course that we did, Betrayals and Broken Promises, has been put up on YouTube. So that that goes into detail about the Dharm Yudh Morcha. The Dharm Yudh Morcha was a peaceful protest movement started in August of 1982 by Sant Jarnail Singh Khalsa and the Akali Dal in order to get the Anandpur Sahib resolution implemented, among other demands. It was a non-violent movement. It was a movement that was predicated on getting Sikh rights within the framework of the Indian Constitution. It was not a separatist document or a separatist movement. And its goal was to have protections for minority populations, low caste people, women across India. The Dharmiya Morcha was the last large-scale morcha that the Bant took part in, besides the Kisan protests, the Kisan Morcha of 3 years ago. So before that, this was the last large-scale protest and the last Bantik protest that took place. Before Dharmiya Morcha, it was quite common for the Bants to take part in these large-scale Bantik protests. This was a common sort of practice of Sikhs from the 1920s onwards. This happened quite often, where Sikhs would engage in these really large-scale protest movements. The Dharmiya Morcha was really, really well attended, meaning it was well supported by the community. Something like, if I remember correctly, 800,000 people were arrested in 2 years. Just an incredible amount of people being arrested in 2 years during the Dharmiya Morcha. So it was really just this incredible movement that was really well supported by the community at large. And the Indian government's response to it was the attack on the Harimandar Sahib complex.
Thank you. And I did link the course in the chat if folks are interested in getting more information there. Our next question is, what efforts have been made to trace and recover the material taken from the Sikh reference library?
A lot of efforts have been made by groups like Punjab Digital Library and Bantik groups that have been working on this for years. The Akali Dal itself even sued, the SGPC, sued the Indian Army at one point, asking for the return of materials. That court case didn't go anywhere. So there have been efforts made, but the Indian Army has been completely silent on the issue and has not responded to any inquiries about it. So we don't know if that means that they destroyed it, if they looted, we don't know what happened to that material. For a long time, the narrative was that it was all destroyed, that it was all burnt. But we know that that's not the case, that much of it was looted and then the rest was burnt. So efforts have been made to try to find that out. A concerted effort needs to be made by Bantik organizations and Bantik political parties to really make this a focus of a singular issue that needs to have a lot of attention put on it, to put pressure on the government to give us a real response as to what happened to all that material. And that hasn't happened, unfortunately.
I guess to go with that question, we just got a new one. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add, but why have political parties not asked from the Indian government about this literature that was burnt in the Akal Takht Library? They, the Akali Dals and Congress Party, have been silent until now.
Yeah, they have been silent, unfortunately. There may be some Akali Dal organizations, because there's so many different Akali Dals that have talked about it, but the main Akali Dal, the Badal Akali Dal, I don't believe has brought up this issue before. I could be wrong on that, though. I should look into that. Yeah, there's not a lot more to say, unfortunately.
I think we have one more question, and then maybe we can close out for today. But are there any sources I can read to get more insights into the hate crimes Hindus committed against Sikhs between 77 and 84? Could you elaborate if many hate crimes went unreported?
So from 77 to 84, it was more of a concerted campaign by the government and police forces against Sikhs. But there were hate crimes committed by right-wing Hindu groups as well. These were usually done outside of Punjab. I'll give a quick example. In early 1983, 3 gurdwaras were attacked in Rajasthan by a right-wing Hindu group in Rajasthan. One Gurdwara was burnt, and a statement was made that the Sikhs of Rajasthan need to leave Rajasthan as soon as possible, and they should leave it, and it should be a Hindu-only state. So those types of attacks did occur. I think a good source for, I don't think that all of the different attacks have been documented in one place, but a good place to look for them might be a book by Gurmeet Singh called A History of Sikh Struggles, which is a 4-volume book that details everything that was in the news during the Dharmiyad Morcha, really looking from 1981 to 84 and going through day by day, talking about everything that happened in the movement. There's a lot of information in that book if you can get your hands on it. I think a few of the volumes have been digitized and are available on Punjab Digital Library, but it's a 4-volume book. But I don't think there's been one place that has really documented all of the different attacks that occurred. No, unfortunately not.
All right. I think that's it for today. I'll close this out, but just yes, and Piercing, is there anything else you wanted to add before I?
Yeah. So I ended up having more information than I thought I would for today's class. So I think what we'll do is we will do next week continue to talk about June 84, especially from the Bantik historical angle, and maybe begin November 84 and then finish November 84 the week after. So next week will not just be about November, but it will continue to be about June, and then we will go into November, just to give people a heads up. And we will create a bibliography that we will send as well of all the different books that I used in creating these presentations. That bibliography will be given at the end of the 4 weeks. We will share that with you. And yes, I think that's it. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, just to reiterate, on behalf of SikhRI, I thank Santvir Singh, our e-Sangat today. Thank you all for tuning in and spending time with us. Please join us next week for week 2 of this course. And just before I close this completely out, don't forget to tune into the Sikhcast, a podcast produced by SikhRI, where we explore the various issues and events affecting Sikhs worldwide. Some of the articles that Santvir Singh mentioned were turned into podcasts. So if that's like a medium that you like more, you can check those out there. Thank you for joining in. Today's webinar will be ending now. Vaigu Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaigu Ji Ki
Fateh.